The dynamics of an engaged workforce. The topic of my conversation today was Stephen Klima. He is head of revenue enablement with WorkStep. Hi, Stephen.
Hi.
Thanks for being with me today. I really appreciate it. So, what are the major differences that you see between engaging salaried employees versus hourly?
Yeah, it's a great question and one that we have a conversation a lot with organizations. And really, when you think of the different workforces, someone that's behind a desk, able to give feedback at any given time, versus someone that's on a front line and they're out in the field, out in the warehouse, they're not behind a desk to give that feedback. So what we see is most common in the engagement space is doing an annual survey, which is once a year, typically 30 to 50 questions, and everyone's funneled in to complete that at a given time. And that's what's commonly always been done for office staff. And then it's just been extended to the hourly population to complete as well. So when you're thinking about specifically engaging an hourly population, what's actually recommended is more of a milestone-based approach for them, so that you can address their concerns early and often by doing check-ins when they first start, a couple months into the role, and so on, so that you have real-time feedback from their perspective when their turnover's at the highest risk.
Well, based on what they tell you, is it fair to say, or not, that a salaried employee is more engaged than an hourly employee or not? I mean, is there a generalization that can be made?
It would be hard to state whether one's more engaged versus not, but what we can say is, based off the survey practices that have historically been done, is an office staff is more attuned to be able to have less frequent surveys, and that once a year is more accommodating, versus the ever-changing dynamic roles for frontline workers. They need to be touched based upon further because their roles can change so quickly each day. So to keep equally engaged employees, you just need to make sure that you're communicating with them more frequently.
I suppose I should ask you to define for me what you mean by an engaged workforce. What does that word mean?
It's vague, right?
Yeah.
So engagement can mean a lot of different things. Engagement specifically, when we're talking about it, it's really having an understanding of the voice of the employee. So making sure that you understand what they're liking about the role, what they're not liking, so that you can create a conducive workspace that allows them to flourish.
Yeah, well, I mean, given the fact that it's so challenging in some environments, especially warehouses today, to even get employees, number one. Number two, to retain them, which means the engagement factor comes in. I guess this becomes a critical conversation, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you could definitely hire and hire, but then if those individuals are leaving, then you're constantly going to be in that flow. And really, engagement when it comes to impacting a business, first thing that most people think of is turnover. And of course, that's a huge piece of it. There's a Harvard Business Review study that shows if it's an engaged workforce, 90% less likely to turn over. But some of the other benefits that aren't thought about as frequently is there's an increase in productivity. You have fewer quality issues, fewer safety issues, and ultimately all of those bundle up to impact a higher customer satisfaction at the end rating.
It certainly seemed to be the case. But what trends are you seeing right now in terms of frontline employee expectations? What do they want from a job environment these days?
Yeah, some of the biggest things we're seeing in terms of new trends over the past year or two have really all been around flexibility. And now that's probably not so surprising because we hear that also, of course, across office staff with wanting to work remotely, have flexible schedules. But when we're thinking specifically more along the blue collar type positions, it's still that flexibility. So being able to have more control over both the number of shifts you work, your shift schedules, opportunities to have same day pay versus the historic way of doing payments. And then even more creative total rewards type packaging so that employees have more control over how they're compensated, how they're working, and creating an environment that suits their needs the best.
I would consider that almost by definition, a frontline worker cannot be working remotely most of the time.
Yes.
They're in warehouses or on the
setting.
production line. They're not working from home.
Absolutely.
Right. And so in exchange, you've got to give them some kind of a work experience that rewards them for doing what others, have the luxury of not doing anymore.
Yep,
So,
definitely.
yeah. So how has the economy impacted employee engagement?
Yes, so obviously inflation is here. And with that, a lot of companies have increased their wages. So the employees are being paid more than what they were previous years. But what we've seen from our studies is actually year over year, even though employees have gotten raises, pay satisfaction is actually lower currently today than it was previously.
Why?
With inflation, everything's more expensive. So even if you did get a pay raise, obviously that may or may not counteract the inflation depending on the organization, but it's also just so top of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And when that comes to then organizations, there's always a limit to the number of raises you can give. And eventually you might not be able to give a new wage increase even if you wanted to. So it comes then to what else can you focus on? Can you revamp different aspects of the role that create more engagement, such as career growth opportunities, different benefits packages that you can provide, and really just finding out what else can you do once you've maxed out those pay increases.
Are there indeed career growth opportunities for frontline workers, say in a warehouse? And what would that constitute?
Yeah, it would depend on the organization. So for some roles, like oftentimes if you think of a driver position, there might not be true career growth potential there because they want to just stay in that driving role. But there's absolutely room for career growth in a lot of warehouse type roles where a lot of the individuals I speak to, oftentimes they started their career at their organization in a warehouse role, and you can work your way up, whether that's into the operations side of the house, into HR, or to just a more senior position within the warehouse itself.
Considering the challenges, as I said, of attracting and retaining workers, frontline workers especially today, this is a crucial conversation. Thank you so much, Stephen, for enlightening us on that. But I do want to ask you very briefly to tell me about WorkStep and where you guys fit into the picture also.
Yeah, WorkStep, how we fit into the picture is we're an engagement solution. So again, broad, there's a lot of different engagement solutions, but where WorkStep comes into play is we were designed and built specifically for distributed hourly workforces. And so what's unique about our approach is we're reaching out to the employees where they are. So they're getting feedback directly from text conversations that take roughly 90 seconds to complete. That way that you can get real-time pulses on the employees throughout their journey in the company. But most specifically, what's unique is how we're analyzing that feedback for the organizations. Because one challenge in the engagement space is you're given feedback and you base your decisions off what the employee sentiment is, because that's a logical step. But what we found is by tying it to behavioral outcomes, you're going to be able to really make a significant change on that employee engagement. So an example of what that would be is, let's say we're rolled out with this organization and you left a survey feedback that you're unhappy with the amount of pay that you're receiving. Well, that's definitely something we want to note as a company. But if another individual leaves feedback saying they're unhappy with career growth and they quit the company while you retain, and we start seeing that trend more and more, then we know for that company at that specific organization, if you're to address career growth, that's going to have a larger impact on your turnover and overall engagement than necessarily a pay increase. And what we find is location to location, while they're under the same organization umbrella, they have their own personality, and being able to address really curated action items is what allows organizations to make a large impact.
Stephen, thanks again for talking to me about this issue of frontline employee engagement. I really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.
I've been speaking to Stephen Klima of WorkStep. Thank you very much for watching.